Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Salesforce Ben LinkedIn Live collaboration. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the world of Salesforce DevOps from an architect's perspective, covering everything from defining a DevOps strategy to the core components that make it successful. So while we wait for everyone to join, let us know where you're logging in from today. We always love to see what a global audience we have attending. Okay, let's get started. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. My name is Zaina Dar, and I'm the events content producer at Salesforce Ben, and I'll be your host for this event. I'm really excited to introduce you to DevOps experts and authors of Salesforce DevOps for Architects, Lars, Malmqvist, and Rob Cowell, who are here with us today to talk about the crucial role of DevOps in Salesforce and how architects can leverage it to drive success in their organizations. Lars, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Lars Malmqvist. I'm a partner in Implement Consulting Group, a management consultancy in Copenhagen. This is my third book on Salesforce, and I'm also a Salesforce CTA. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Great, thank you. And you, Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob Cowell. I'm one of the DevOps advocates over at Gearset, a specialist Salesforce DevOps platform. And I generally just provide content and education and guidance to everyone on all things Salesforce DevOps.
Nice. Great, thank you. So before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. So as this is a webinar, all lines are muted, but don't worry, we'll be having a Q&A at the end for you to ask Lars and Rob any burning questions you may have. So feel free to submit the questions in the comments throughout the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and will be available on our Salesforce Ben LinkedIn and YouTube channel, just in case you need to drop off or would like to share it with your colleagues. Fab. Well, I'll hand it over to you guys to talk about what inspired them to write Salesforce DevOps for Architects and what they believe is the biggest misconception about DevOps in the Salesforce ecosystem.
Thanks, Zaina. It's a great starter question. What on earth inspired us to write a book about Salesforce DevOps? So I think for me, one of the key drivers was the fact that there are a lot of misconceptions around what Salesforce DevOps is and isn't. And also a lot of the kind of existing material around Salesforce DevOps has typically been very hands-on and very sort of aimed at developers, hence the name DevOps. But I don't think there's been as much content at the sort of higher level looking at the architectural aspects. How do you define a DevOps culture within your organization? You know, what are some of the downstream impacts? What are the moving parts that you need for an overall strategy? And those were definitely sort of areas that I was looking to explore with the book. And I think in terms of those misconceptions, I think I wanted to kind of pick up the fact that, you know, despite the name DevOps, it's not just for developers. I think there's room for obviously architects, hence the book, but also admins and even business analysts can get involved in that entire life cycle of getting an efficient DevOps delivery process going.
Yeah, I think that's great points. I mean, I should just point out that this is definitely Rob's book first and foremost. He was writing it way before I got involved. And I was brought in relatively late in the process. And the reason why I thought it was such an exciting project to become a part of was what Rob is saying here. I think there's been a tendency in the adoption in the Salesforce ecosystem of DevOps to focus on tools, to focus on, you know, the day-to-day practices and ways that you do things in the technical level to make a DevOps pipeline work. That's kind of been where the emphasis has been in terms of the content that's been out there. And there hasn't really been a lot of content that zooms out and takes sort of a big picture view and looks at DevOps also from a strategic organizational point of view. And I think, you know, that's something that we're trying to do with this book. And I think that is quite important. But I mean, obviously, like DevOps in the Salesforce world has evolved quite a lot from the early days to today. I don't know. if you have any thoughts on that, Rob.
Oh no, absolutely. To paraphrase a popular album, we've come a long way, baby. I think if we look back at the sort of early days of Salesforce as a development platform, and don't forget that it started out as an application more than a platform. But I think over time, we got those programmatic capabilities, but no real way of crafting them. And so, back in the dark ages, should we call them, we were having to sort of implement things directly into production, which some people still do, but it's not the recommended practice. But also, the tooling took a little while to catch up. And as a result, the process took a little while to catch up. We, as Salesforce practitioners, we sometimes lagged behind folks on other platforms that were making these advances in their delivery mechanisms. We've gone from change sets. We had the Force.com deployment toolkit based on Ant, which, if folks aren't aware, is being deprecated any day now. I haven't got the exact date in front of me, but I know there's announcements going around at the moment. Some folks will have remembered sort of working with tools such as Maven's Mate, which is another mechanism. It was a combination of sort of a very powerful IDE overlay and a lot of great deployment tools. So piece by piece, I think we've seen, gradually the tooling get better. We're now at the stage where there's a vibrant third-party market for Salesforce DevOps tools. And of course, Salesforce have now entered the arena with DevOps Center as well. So there's definitely some acknowledgement, I think, from Salesforce that, we need to level up compared to other platforms. And I think, we're slowly getting there. But I think one of the important things that we do cover in the book is that, scaling your tools needs to always be in parallel to scaling your processes and your structure.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I actually think a lot of this is also just, a consequence of the fact that the Salesforce ecosystem is maturing. Salesforce is becoming a more business critical system. We can't, I guess not just a CRM anymore. It's a platform where we run a lot of our front office business processes, and we can't just go in and change something in production anymore because it has really wide-ranging implications, right? So the tooling follows also the improvement in tooling, the improvement in processes. They also follow a maturing of Salesforce as a platform, I think. But I mean, I actually agree that if we're looking at sort of what you could say, if you're an architect, what are sort of the critical responsibilities like that you have for implementing DevOps? I think those have really increased as part of this process, right? We can't be in a situation where DevOps is an afterthought anymore. You need to think this in with your architecture governance, with your architecture vision. You have your vision for how you're going to run the platform, how you're going to run your development and your configuration and your administration of the system, and all of these things need to fit both with the culture and with the tooling that you're using, right? So as an architect, we need to level up on understanding these processes and how they fit in, not just in the how do I build a pipeline kind of a way, but in how do DevOps processes work as part of the overall platform engineering and platform evolution that we're a part of.
No, absolutely. I think it's like so much of implementing and delivering on the platform. Architectural thinking is key to that. One of the key tenets that always stands out to me for architectural thinking is just managing risk. Okay, so sometimes you can prevent those risk scenarios. Sometimes you have to kind of accept a reasonable amount of risk, but then you build strategies for mitigating that. And I definitely think that DevOps is very much leaning into that mitigation of risk. It's a more structured, stable environment for delivering change. It's predictable. You could have things like peer review. You have various stage gates. It leans very heavily into a testing mindset as well. So, a lot of times you'll hear folks talk about shifting left, which is basically, if you can imagine a workflow going from left to right, then you want to make sure that your checks and balances and your testing and your commitment to quality is as far left on that timeline as possible. And people talk about that from a testing perspective. They talk about it from a security perspective. And so, these are the type of sort of considerations and mindsets that we need to bring to all of our processes in Salesforce, but particularly DevOps, to make sure that we're delivering not just quickly and efficiently, but actually we're delivering quality as well.
Yeah, I mean, building sort of quality and security and robustness into the pipeline. I think that's sort of the dream we're all sort of would like to see happen, right? We have these standards and the architectural governance around how we should do things, and then our DevOps pipeline actually supports that directly in the tooling, right? And then it all becomes a lot more agile, and we have a lot more flexibility and a lot less risk in our deployments, which means that we can take more chances with innovation and all of that stuff. So it all sort of fits together in a higher in the sort of the higher picture.
So if you were looking to make sure that, in your due diligence process of making sure that you had, the technology to support that type of thinking and adopting all of those considerations, what are some of the things that you'd be looking out for in your sort of selection of a pipeline to make sure that you tick those architectural boxes?
Yeah, so I don't think there is a one size fits all for DevOps tools. Like, I think the reason why we now have a vibrant ecosystem with a lot of different vendors that have a lot of quite great products, and we also have a strong open source community of tooling, is because it does depend on where you're starting from, right? If you're starting from sort of a classic, I've implemented Salesforce, it's my system, I've had an external implementation partner doing it, I don't necessarily have a lot of internal capability around it, then maybe you look for a tool that gives you more of a turnkey kind of a solution to get you started. Whereas as you sometimes see, you will see organizations that have very substantial internal capabilities. They are actually running development teams and DevOps pipelines for their order management system, for their ERP, for other critical line of business systems, and they want to leverage synergies between those, and they actually want to be sure that they can enforce architectural governance across their entire system landscape and not just Salesforce in isolation. And that's an entirely different kind of tool chain that you need there, and you probably need to sort of combine a variety of tools to achieve that in a consistent way that fits your enterprise architecture. And then on top of that, we need to think about all of these things that we were just talking about, which is like, how do I do my automated security tests? How do I do my quality checks? And again, the level to which you need to do that will very much depend on the complexity of the changes you're making, the velocity of the changes you're making, the capability of your in-house teams. So ultimately, my recommendation is always you start from where you are, right? You, as an organization, you need to look at what are the kind of changes that we're making, what is the velocity of the changes that we're making, what is the level of risk that we have for the deployments we're making, because that'll also tell you about how much automated testing and things like that you need to build into the pipeline. And on that basis, once you've understood that, you can have a look at the market, you can have a look at the different vendors, you can pick between a pipeline that you put together yourself, maybe with GitHub Actions and a bunch of open source tools, versus I'm going to go and buy one of the big vendors and just have them come and do an implementation for me, and then that's what I'm gonna run with, or somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah, and I think you raise a great point there, in that it's important to start any DevOps strategy, right? And I'd very deliberately use the word strategy rather than implementation, because I think a lot of it, implementation is something that should come once you've built your strategy, once you've worked out what you want to do, what are your goals, as you said, assess where you are today, and then start working about, okay, how can we start improving those processes? So, one of the common pitfalls that I see with a lot of folks that are new to DevOps and trying to sort of, get started on that journey is they'll go tools first. Okay. But also, even regardless of choice of tooling as well, they'll say, okay, our goal is to get a completely automated end-to-end CI/CD pipeline, code in, release out. And that's not the way to start. One of the most important pitfalls to avoid is not running before you can walk. And what I generally encourage folks to do is learn how to do something manually and then look to automate that one step. So you could have 10 steps. If you can automate that first step in the pipeline, you've already saved some time. When you've kind of proved out that that's working consistently and robustly, then start picking up some of the others. So, you often will hear DevOps folks generally talking about, the DevOps maturity model of, start climbing that tree. Don't try and get to the end. There are so many metaphors, cliches even around, don't walk before you can run, or it's a marathon, not a sprint. There are so many ways of phrasing it, but I think they all hold true. It's it's something that you should do in small incremental steps, and then you have a much greater chance of succeeding there. And I think a strong architect will kind of bake that into the strategy, in terms of, okay, here is what we want to achieve. Here is our rollout plan of how we're going to do that in phased increments. And then you can avoid a lot of those pitfalls. I don't know whether there's sort of other pitfalls you might have seen along the way with implementations there.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, and I completely agree with everything you just said, by the way. I think one of the things that I've seen is you effectively leave DevOps as its own little thing in the corner. There's the DevOps guy, and he does the pipeline, and then the developers may talk to the DevOps guy when they need something deployed, but it's not really integrated. There isn't really an understanding of why this is important. It's just, somebody told us that we need a DevOps pipeline. Our developers probably told us we needed a pipeline. But we haven't actually taken that step back. We haven't had that strong architect that's gone in and that's taken responsibility for it and said, okay, this is actually how it fits into the bigger picture, right? So you end up not having the governance, you end up not having monitoring, you don't actually have any way of knowing whether it's delivering value to the organization or not. You just have, a tool chain effectively.
Yeah.
And I've seen that on more than one project where effectively, we've got the DevOps tooling, but it's not really adding value. Actually, people are finding it a little bit annoying because there are all of these stage gates and hoops they have to jump through now. And it was easier just to do it with a chain set, right? Yeah. So that's another pitfall I would sort of recommend against. I think actually sort of connecting back to what you were just saying, I think this is something that happens very frequently when people try to move too fast, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think, and to your point about the DevOps guy or the DevOps team, and it's always kind of that afterthought in a process. Sometimes people look at me a little strangely when I kind of pitch this one, but I always like to sort of make sure that when we're looking at an end-to-end delivery process, DevOps is for everyone, including the business analysts. Now, they may not be hands-on working with Git or Jenkins or GitHub Actions or any of those technical elements. But if you think around kind of some of the key concepts of DevOps around small, manageable, incremental chunks, the best place to start that journey is when your analyst is collecting requirements. They've already adopted that DevOps mindset. They're breaking things into those small decomposed units. So, if we look at something like Jira, one of the more popular project management tools, start breaking, big requests, epics into the stories. Start building those stories into tasks, those tasks potentially into subtasks. You can go many levels deep on this, but ultimately what you want to do is start building your requests for your developers and your admins and your implementers in a way that lends itself to that small iterable, gradual, incremental thing. A lot of folks will talk about release early, release often, but they're not talking about the big projects. They're talking about, regularly, gradually improve. You're looking at this continuous improvement life cycle. And so, DevOps should be across the entire team that's responsible for implementing, from ideation. Okay, sometimes you can even get your business units to think, how can I frame this in a way that actually means I can get it delivered faster? Through the business analysts, through the admins and architects and developers, all this sort of implementation team, and all the way through to sort of delivery. You can have separate teams that solely focus on delivery. A lot of teams, in big organizations will have a release manager that aggregates these incremental changes. But I think unless you've kind of got everybody kind of thinking about how can we most effectively deliver this in that DevOps way, potentially we've got another one of those pitfalls.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. It's something that that is emphasized in the book as well, which is really around sort of the shift in mindset and culture that's required to make this work, right? So, like, going back, like we're just talking about pitfalls, another thing that does happen is that, even if you get this up and running in the right way, but the business is still effectively thinking in terms of, there's going to be a release, then we're going to do all of these training and UAT and sort of a traditional release model, then, okay, we've got a nice process up to our sandbox, our full sandbox environment or a partial sandbox environment, but then it just sits there, and actually the business value doesn't get delivered any quicker, right? So I think business analyst, yes, but even all the way to making the business understand the value of this incremental mindset, like how it actually creates value quicker for them, right?
Sure.
And giving them the confidence that can be done without being wildly disruptive, because you'll hear things like people say, well, I mean, we can't do training every week, and we don't have if these things change too quickly, then it's going to be too hard for our salespeople or our service people, and they can't absorb the change and all of that. There are good answers to how you address all of these things, but in my experience, actually, even once you get the entire project on board and you get the business analyst all the way to release manager aligned, you still have a challenge getting that value the final step. I don't know if you've seen the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's again, it sort of ties back to some of the things that we were talking about. The role of an architect in any organization or any implementation. It's important to not just highlight the benefits, but also highlight the risks. There are the inevitable question that sometimes comes up with these big transformations is, well, what are the risks of doing this? And it's great to elaborate on them, but there's also, what are the risks of not doing this? What risks are we actually fixing by bringing, we get that quicker feedback cycle. So we make sure we're delivering the right thing. We get more efficient testing and stage gates. So we make sure that we're delivering the thing right. And I'm paraphrasing the great Ian Gotts there. Do the right thing, do the thing right. It's great advice. And I think, there's a lot to be said for, not just highlighting the benefits, the out and out net benefits of implementing DevOps, but also talking about, the risks that we're actually preventing or mitigating, at least. So I think, it's getting everybody on board with that. And I think, some of that is just, don't try and do everything at once, as we've talked about. One of the kind of metaphors that I think of that is, sometimes, here at home, I'll cook dinner for the family, and I'm a messy cook, and I have stuff out everywhere, all over the kitchen, because I'm trying to do everything at once. And my wife will always tell me, tidy up as you go along. And I think that kind of applies to DevOps as well. It's, particularly when we talk about, you mentioned sort of QA and UAT cycles there. Don't wait until everything is dev ready and then ask the users or the customers what they think. Make it an engagement, collaborative piece. Saying, so this is the first draft of this, and we're do you want it this or do you want it that? And just kind of get that loop, because you can actually iterate a lot quicker. Because with DevOps, you can make the change and deploy it into an environment where they can see it far quicker than traditional delivery methods. It's much easier to tweak, pick up your changes, and only those isolated changes that are relevant to what you're working on, and get them to where they can be assessed. So effectively, your UAT is ongoing through the whole life cycle of any project.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Looking ahead, we've come a long way. We're still in this, I think, process of evolution in the Salesforce ecosystem. We're still perhaps not as far along in DevOps terms as more traditional software development, at least. Where do you see sort of Salesforce DevOps going in the sort of the near to mid term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be remiss of us to not mention the impact of AI on all things at the moment. And Salesforce are very, very heavily into AI, as I'm sure you've seen from a lot of their recent announcements. We have TDX coming up next week, and there are many, many announcements and topics and sessions on AI. So I think it would be foolish to disregard AI as it applies to DevOps. I've not yet really seen a strong, compelling use case for it. But I think it's not far around the corner. I know there are some initiatives that are doing things like using GPT type tools to generate user stories, and craft those and frame those in a way that we're used to. Quite often historically we've seen user stories for development. As a such and such user, I would like to do X, Y, and Z so that I can A, B, C. That kind of formula, I think, lends itself very well to GPT. In other scenarios, we've obviously got code generation thing, and I think for generating tests, there's potential there. But having seen some of the generated code and the generated tests, I wouldn't want to say this is a complete and fully robust test that will cover everything that I need to test here. I think it can help, for folks that are skilling up in that area, can point them in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, I think obviously AI and machine learning is the the futurist topic of the day. But I think in a more sort of focused sense of what does the future hold for DevOps, I think we continue to learn from those other platforms. There are many different Git branching strategies, for example, and some lend themselves to Salesforce better than others. So I think we'll gradually kind of see a refinement process of some of that. How do we manage our source control, for example, for DevOps pipelines? Automation is another potential area that we can see, but again, without kind of throwing AI into the mix, it's a little difficult to see, where can we make even greater enhancements on that one.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, the thing with the AI right now is you can see the potential, but then when you use it, it's not 100% there, right? So you need to somehow, if it gets there, it will be really transformational, because we'll be able to write all of our unit tests automatically. Right now, it's not quite there, right? Same with the user stories, right? It'll help me write a user story, but it's not going to just do it for me. It'll help me understand my existing configuration, but it's not 100% accurate in everything. So I think it's a really, really tantalizing situation right now, because it's it's
I'm
right
excited.
there, you can see it. It's right there, you can see it, and it's still not quite there. I guess
I'm excited to see that first use case that that will be the compelling killer app for AI in DevOps. And I look forward to being proved wrong. I'm not infallible with my future-looking eye, but I'm not seeing the the strong case. If someone can crack 100% accurate automated merge conflict resolution. I think that would be a great thing. That's an opportunity waiting to happen. But yeah, humans are winning that battle so far.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I guess that's also just, all of the, for instance, DevSecOps practices that you've got on other platforms, right? You probably will start to see those kinds of things come into Salesforce, more better integration with monitoring and observability. Also topics where I think we're just going to see a maturing, right, in general of the tool set. And AI or no AI, I think our tools are just getting better at the moment, and quite rapidly at that, which is amazing to see.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's been great exploring some of the some of those architectural areas that we touch upon in the book there. I am really keen though to sort of see what everyone else thinks are the hot DevOps topics, and see if there's some questions going. So, Zaina, do you want to see if we've got some great questions coming in?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, thank you so much for that really insightful discussion, guys. Hopefully everyone attending now has a much better idea of how to sort of implement effective DevOps practices in their organization. So without further ado, it's time for our Q&A. So if you have any questions for Lars and Rob, please feel free to submit them in the comments, and we'll try to get around to as many as possible. So we've got a few questions here. So let me just bring them up. So in your opinion, what's the likelihood that smaller Salesforce implementation partners will be able to adopt DevOps going forward?
Oh, I'd love to take that one if I can, Lars. So before my current role as a DevOps advocate, I was a small implementation partner. The entire team is sat in front of you talking. I was a one-man implementation partner. So I use DevOps in a number of ways, and this obviously comes from a consultancy space. It may differ a little bit, if you're sort of a developer in an end user environment. But effectively, it gave me a few opportunities. So by using source control, we had that safety net. Okay, so if anything went wrong, we could roll back. We could see where something was introduced, when it was introduced, by whom, although it was usually me being a one-man consultant. So we had that opportunity, but also, all of the benefits that we have there in terms of, robust testing, automation, getting things in front of people quickly so that we can get that feedback. They're absolutely vital in a consultancy, because as an implementation partner, you're either going to be on an hourly rate basis or a daily rate basis, or there's going to be a fixed price project. So you have to deliver as efficiently as you can. Okay, because there will be budgets and timescales all over the place, and DevOps is really, really useful for doing that. So as you don't necessarily have all the multi-developers working on different features, collaborative model, which is fine. Okay, it's important to realize that DevOps is a set of techniques. It's not a single technique. So to an extent, you can sort of pick and choose which bits work for your particular scenario. And certainly, as a solo admin or a solo developer kind of working on a project, you want to make sure that you've kind of got your changes kept safe. You've got a robust set of environments that you move those through. You've got a bit of due diligence there. So it's more around the sort of the governance and the pace of delivery, I think, is important for the smaller partners there.
Cool. Any thoughts, Lars?
Yeah, I completely agree with Rob. I mean, I think it goes back to the discussion we were having around, starting from where you are. And there is a very strong set of free and open source, or at least relatively inexpensive tools out there that are available right now. So even if you're not in the position to buy one of the, top name platforms, that is not stopping you from having a good setup. You have the capability to do that. And again, start small. Start with getting everything into source control. Start with learning how to use SFDX to do your deployment. Start with doing some automated testing. Whatever brings value to your process right now. And I mean, ultimately, like DevOps should be a net positive ROI here for you, even as a small partner, right? It should enable you to do things with more automation, less hassle, and less risk. So as long as you focus on where there are actual wins for you in your process, I think this is there's no minimum size to start adopting this.
Okay, nice. So we've got a question here about the best way to become an architect from a Salesforce developer.
Go on, Lars.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I mean, I think the key to being a great architect is having a certain amount of breadth across a number of different areas and being able to see the different environments. So, a certain level of exposure to other platforms is useful. If you want to be a Salesforce architect, perhaps it's not the number one thing to start with. So I would try to get exposure to as broad a swathe of the platform as possible, including DevOps as one of those areas. And of course, you need a couple of areas where you're deeper than others. But the key is to get broad exposure to projects, to industries, to types of customers, to the clouds on Salesforce, to the different kinds of practices that go on in a development project, and that's what really brings you the foundation to be a good architect, I think.
You, Rob?
Yeah, I think I mean, I obviously agree with that. I think what I would add to that as well is, it's important to think of the architect role, not just a purely technical role. Okay, yes, you absolutely do need to know the platform, and as Lars says, more width than depth on it. But it's a nuanced balance of both. But I think more importantly, the architect role is a way of thinking. It's getting yourself into the habit of, but what if? What if we do this? What if we don't do that? What are the risks? What are the gains? How can we reduce that risk? What are the techniques that we can do to make sure that, when I roll off this project, if I'm in a consultancy role, for example, that the internal team or the customer or whoever it is in a good position, that actually it remains stable throughout its lifetime. So you have to kind of be always forward thinking on those decisions. And, a lot of it isn't technical. It's just getting into that frame of mind of thinking of all the possibilities and, and weighing them up and being able to condense them down. Sometimes, a lot of that architect role is presenting those to the stakeholders, in ways that, you're going to have a varying audience. They're going to be technical folks. There's going to be business folks. So you need to be able to sort of, present a solution or a strategy or whatever, in a way that is actually suitable for that audience. Okay, so absolutely, there is a path from developer to architect, and I think as Lars picked up, you do need to know your platform inside out, but also kind of get used to sort of looking at the non-technical aspects, that the presentation, the planning, the strategy aspects. And then just very quickly to your second point around will DevOps help you with that? Yeah, it's a core element of what is our strategy for delivering these changes. And if you're looking in the architect space of getting some of those certifications, then yeah, there is a DevOps certification. It's deployment and software lifecycle, I think it's called. I may have got the words in the wrong order there, but it's something along those lines, and it's certainly one of the architect certifications on the path to becoming a strong architect.
Fab, thank you. Okay, so how important is community involvement and continuous learning in the field of Salesforce DevOps? And can you recommend any resources for aspiring Salesforce DevOps professionals?
Oh, absolutely vital. Yeah, your greatest resource in any learning journey is your peers. Okay, so I would encourage folks to go to community events, go to local user groups, go to virtual user groups. If there's not a physical one in your area, there's some great online communities. both official and unofficial. So, for example, there is the official, Trailblazer community that Salesforce runs, which is a great pool of experts. But also, social media, X, you may or may not be a fan of that now. Opinions vary, but there's no denying that there's still a lot of us on there, talking about Salesforce topics. LinkedIn as well. There's the SFXD Discord community, if that's your thing. So there's plenty of folks out there that will support that journey. And, when I talk about that journey, it's your learning journey. It's continuous improvement is a tenet of DevOps. It should be a continuous improvement of your learning as well. So yeah, absolutely, start looking at those. And if you want to kind of lean in hard to the DevOps specific thing, you could do a lot worse than go and look at DevOps Launchpad, which kind of starts you at the beginning of a DevOps journey and then gradually brings you up to some of those more advanced topics. And there's certifications, badges, etc. Much like Trailhead, which in itself has some DevOps topics too.
Nice. And you, Lars?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Just want to make just a quick plug for spending some time on GitHub. There are a lot of very good open source DevOps related projects that will teach you a lot about how, like what the options are and what the different components of DevOps stack are, how they can work together, and what are the sort of the key concerns that you need to be aware of when learning DevOps. So that's just, if you really want to dive into the depth of how these things work, I think GitHub is a good place to spend some time.
Okay, nice. Thank you. So could you share a particularly challenging Salesforce DevOps project that you've encountered and how you sort of navigated its complexities to achieve success?
Ooh, now I've got to cast my mind back a bit. So yeah, I mean, before I was in this role, before I was even a consultant, I was working for an end user, and it was a mixed organization, as a lot of large enterprises are. So it wasn't just Salesforce. There was a lot of Microsoft stuff, a lot of very industry specific systems. So it was financial sector, financial services. So there was a lot of systems that, were in that. And again, working on completely different platforms. So one of the challenges was, how do you get a DevOps strategy when you have such a diverse set of tooling? Now, obviously, the incumbent front office systems, the core business systems were a little more established than the Salesforce thing, which was comparatively new to the business. So they would use things like, Team Foundation Server for their sort of orchestrating their deployments. They had, Subversion instead of Git for their source control. Now, the challenge from the Salesforce perspective is that historically, it doesn't really plug into those systems that well. And so, a lot of the challenge there, and going back to what we're saying about sort of the architectural considerations, was the non-technical. It was the first stage was convincing the stakeholders that actually we needed to take a slightly different path because of the things that make our favorite platform unique, right? That there are things that nuances to Salesforce that mean that we have to do things in a slightly different way to other platforms. So I think probably the biggest challenge there was just kind of getting that buy-in to forge a new path, blaze a new trail, as it were, for implementing DevOps in a slightly different way. Once you kind of get that and you get that level of trust with an organization, then you can start moving on to that implementation. And ironically, the implementations can be actually the easier part of that coin. Once you've kind of built a strong strategy to work from, I know the tools, I know the techniques, I just need to convince you that this is the way forward, and then we can go and do them.
Cool. Any insights from you, Lars?
Yeah, actually, I want to say the hardest challenge I've had in DevOps, like Rob, has been non-technical, right? It's a large project that I was brought in to effectively manage continuous development after an initial go live, and it was built by. The initial solution was multi-cloud, and it was built by multiple different, relatively large implementation partners who had each basically done things their own way. So they had different approaches, and they all had, pluses and minuses, but they weren't entirely compatible, and they were having various issues about actually collaborating with these different pipelines. And now the company, they wanted to get into a continuous development model where everybody effectively works to the same process and works with a common pipeline, and we have a common process, even though it's different vendors and different teams working on different clouds. We want to have some consistency, some common standards. And the hardest challenge I've ever had in the DevOps was actually making that happen, aligning these three different vendors on a common model, and successfully getting that set up, both from a process and a technical level, up and running. So culture and practices can matter a lot more than the tech stack.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you. Rob, did you want to talk about your video series really quickly?
Yeah. So when we were talking about the resources of where folks can learn more, one thing that I hadn't thrown into the mix yet, because it's brand new, I've started a YouTube video series called DevOps Quick Bites, which is going to be like probably somewhere in the 4 to 8 minutes kind of range. So, small digestible chunks, which is, the DevOps way, right? It's small incremental pieces of learning. But what I'm going to be doing with that is kind of covering a lot of these topics. And it will be, as we've kind of talked about here, a mixture of the technical, a mixture of the cultural, and just making sure that, folks are getting little nuggets of wisdom and advice on DevOps stuff. So that's another resource for folks to look out for. First ever episode came out about an hour and 45 minutes ago, so it is very, very new. And I'd love to hear folks' feedback on the new series.
Yeah, we've linked that in the chat, so please go and check it out. Cool. So back to questions. How does DevOps fit within the wider architecture governance picture?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics, right? Because architecture governance is really important, especially when you've got what's becoming a mission critical system. You need to have good ways of doing things. You need to have good processes for how you manage change, especially if you want to change quickly. You need to have good practices that ensure that you mitigate risk as you're innovating on the platform. You need to probably have different levels of risk tolerance depending on what you're working on right now and what the implications are. And you need all of that to be supported by your platform and your tooling. And I think DevOps is absolutely critical to that. And that's why it sort of annoys me a lot when people treat DevOps as a thing that's separate to the main platform, right? Because the way that we enable in the final analysis, and again, this is a long process and a long evolution for a lot of companies, but where we want to get to is that our DevOps pipeline, our DevOps practices are actually supporting the architecture vision, and we've got the governance in place, and it is as automated as possible along our DevOps pipeline to mitigate the risks, which enables us to innovate quickly and to get value quickly on the platform. So from my perspective, it's absolutely critical that when you think architecture governance, that DevOps is a central and integrated component of that.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd totally agree with that. DevOps isn't just a thing that we do. It's an approach that we take across everything we do. Okay, so we've kind of talked about it quite a bit here around making sure that DevOps is for everybody. Okay, despite the name Dev, it's not just for the devs. It's an end-to-end way of working. So, and I think the great thing about it is when we look at the the wider governance piece, governance is all about managing that risk, as we've talked about, and DevOps goes a long way to mitigate a lot of that technical risk. Okay, we know that our stuff is tested. We know that we are delivering it in accordance to our business's needs. We have peer review, which allows us to check things like, compliance, for example. Is that there are many considerations there. We have, one of the pillars of DevOps that we talk about in the book is the importance of taking regular backups, not just of our data, but our metadata, to make sure that everything is secured. And then we talk about things like, data masking, encryption, protecting that data as well. And that, of course, is very much part of that governance process as well. So there's definitely elements across the whole breadth of DevOps that align beautifully with a robust governance.
Thank you. So what are some key metrics or indicators that architects should track to measure the success of their DevOps initiatives?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So historically, folks have generally looked at DevOps metrics through the eyes of something called the DORA metrics, DORA, which is it was a set of metrics that came out of a research group, which is now part of Google, I believe. I think they're still over at Google. But effectively, the group kind of holistically looked at, what does DevOps bring to the table, and how can we kind of measure the success of these DevOps implementations or processes. So you can largely summarize it into speed and accuracy. So some of those metrics that we talk about there are, what is the mean delivery rate? So how long does it take to go from a request from a customer or a user to that customer or user actually being able to use the feature that they requested? Okay, and that's tracking how long does it take to deliver a feature. So that will bring in elements of the development, the analysis, the actual deployment, the testing, across the board. It's an end-to-end process. But then we talk about, that speed. We also talk about accuracy. So, what is our mean failure rate? So if we're delivering changes very quickly, but only 1 in 10 of them actually works first time or deploys first time, or, we deploy it, but there's a bug and we've got to rework that to get it correct, and then that kind of failure rate is going to go up. And that's not really what we're aiming for here. We want to make sure that not only are we responsive to change and delivering at a good pace, but we want to make sure that it works first time, ideally. Now, the interesting thing about that is the more things work first time, the less rework you've got to do, which means that your speed of delivery goes up as a consequence, because you're not bogged down by having to fix things all the time. There's some others. I can talk to them, or Lars, did you want to pick up a couple? I'm happy either way.
No, I mean, you can go on. I mean, I want to say, again, most people work with the DORA metrics because they're good placeholders for what we really want to get to. And I mean, obviously, what we really want to measure is how quickly and how much value are we able to get into production, right? And that's not something that we can just go and measure directly. So we measure metrics that tell us something about how quickly can we go from idea to finished feature, and with how much accuracy and with how little risk, right? And the DORA metrics are really, really good for that. So just zooming out, the reason why these are really good metrics is they correlate really well with this idea of getting value quickly to the business.
Yeah. There is another couple of those DORA metrics, and I will call out just one more, although I do encourage folks to go and explore the full set. But another one, and you mentioned on risk there, one of them are all around recovery. Okay, so how quickly can we get back up and running and back to a stable state when things inevitably do go wrong? We're not expecting all of our systems to be infallible. Data loss can happen and does happen. So it's important to, when we talk about one of those pillars of DevOps being backups, how quickly can we get from, oh my God, it's all gone wrong, to actually, don't panic, we've got the backup, we've restored it, we're back in business, we've plugged the gap or fixed the bug or closed the security thing or whatever it is that caused the problem in the first place. How long can we get to a point of stability once again? And that's another important one of the DORA metrics there.
Yeah. Okay, nice. Thank you. So what are some best practices for integrating automation into Salesforce DevOps workflows?
I mean, I think we've covered a lot of this already, which is really, be sure that you know why you're automating it. Be sure that you've got the process in place already, and that you know how to do this. The steps that you're automating in a manual way first. Understand why you're automating. What's the value that you get from automating, and then be sure to do it step by step and to test that the effects are as you expected. From the word go, right? So it's about having this sort of disciplined, structured approach to it, where you're not automating because it sounds cool to automate a lot of stuff. You're automating because it really makes sense in your process to automate this part, and it saves you time and it adds value to your process.
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at it in the same way as we look at automation within Salesforce itself, right? If you're building out a new flow, you want to understand, what is the process that I'm automating here? Do I understand what is coming in, what's happening inside my loop or whatever, and do I understand what result I want to get out at the other end? Okay, and I think if we apply that same lens to DevOps automation, we're probably going to be in a pretty good state, right? Because it's the same technique of analysis. What are we actually trying to achieve here? How are we doing it today? How do we want to do it tomorrow? What does it take to get us there from A to B? And I think as long as you're kind of applying that approach to automating things, and as Lars says, make sure that your manual processes are rock solid first, then you can start getting those those automation savings of time and energy. And the more you automate, ultimately, the more time you have to go back to your development and implement those great new features that people people are asking for. So that the less manual DevOps you do, the more development you can do, and then you'll see gains. Happier users, more money for your company, if that's a thing. Less time spent on the DevOps thing means you're not staying up until 2 a.m. fighting with a change set that you've got your code coverage sorted. All these elements makes for happier Salesforce people.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think we've probably got time for maybe one more question. How can architects use low-code or no-code tools to empower less technical users in the DevOps process?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, like so much of what we do with the Salesforce platform, there are multiple ways to do things, and there is no real right answer to, this is the way things should be done, okay? Because you're going to have admins, you're going to have developers, you're going to have people with varying levels of experience in each of those disciplines. And so, there's definitely space for, the hardcore developers that love their command line. They want to build a script. There are plugins and lots of fantastic open source tools that allow you to really drill down to the fine detail of DevOps. And if that's your way of working, fantastic. But to that question of the low code, no code aspect, that's definitely the space that the both the third-party Salesforce DevOps tools and now DevOps Center are trying to address. Okay, so again, it's putting your flow hat on a little bit, because a lot of the time things will be your pipeline of moving from environment to environment and from source control and so on will be connected boxes. Okay, you have a box, you connect the two together, you configure things. So as a mindset of on the how do I implement this at the technical level, hopefully some of those tools will make things much more familiar. I still think it's very important to understand what is it doing behind that box, and I do. I've regularly done an admin's guide to Git being the most popular source control system, and I walk people through that process using Visual Studio Code. Now they hear the word code. Sometimes they get a little scared, but actually it's a great way to see what's happening behind the scenes. And then I say, now you don't have to do it this way, but now you understand what these tools are doing, you are better informed to select a tool that works your way. And that's kind of a very important piece. It's find something that works your way. Don't change the way, don't always change the way you work to fit the way that a specific tool is implemented.
Nice. Any thoughts, Lars?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely where there is a very vibrant third-party ecosystem, and we cover a number of the tools in the book, so you can look there for detail. But I want to say it's about finding the right fit for where you are as an organization, and what users you want to involve, and how widely you're able to spread the DevOps process within your organization. Depending on the answer to that, different tools will be better or worse for you. So I think this is something that you're going to have to explore based on your particular organization.
Cool. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. So thank you so much to everyone for attending. We hope you've gained some valuable insights into how to kind of effectively implement DevOps practices as Salesforce architects. So I'd like to extend a big thank you to Lars and Rob for sharing their expertise and insights with us today. And before we round up, any final words, guys?
Keep on learning, folks. Start slowly, keep moving up, and I'm around if you have any questions along the way. I'm sure people can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, as was. Look out for me. I'm happy to help.
Yeah, same here. Happy to help. Not on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn, and generally respond to messages, although not always very quickly. And yeah, I mean, this is a journey, right? So get started, and then take a step, and then take another one.
Nice. Great. Well, thank you again to everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.